Ray Liotta spent decades proving he was more than one role, and the cruel irony is that he was right the entire time, yet none of it mattered the way he hoped. The man who played a gentle ghost in a baseball field, a heartbroken young hero on daytime television, and a smooth romantic lead in a road comedy somehow became permanently anchored to a single image. Henry Hill, walking through the back door of a nightclub, while a narrator explains that he always wanted to be a gangster. That's the version of Ray Liotta the world held on to. Everything else, the range, the discipline, the quiet hunger it took to build a career from nothing in a city that had no reason to notice him, got filed underneath it. He arrived in the world in 1954 in Newark, New Jersey, and within months, his birth parents let him go. An orphanage held him for the first 6 months of his life, before Alfred and Mary Liotta adopted him and brought him home to Union, New Jersey. Alfred and Mary were working class, Italian and Scottish descent, and they raised their family within the Roman Catholic tradition, the kind that meant communion and confirmation, but not prayer sessions at the bedside every night. They never hid the adoption from him. He knew. And knowing didn't make it easier. Anger came with understanding as he grew older, a question that stayed lit for years about how a parent could simply walk away from their own child. His sister Linda carried the same origin story, also adopted, raised alongside him in that same household, and the two of them moved through childhood together in a home that was steady without being emotionally elaborate. He graduated from Union High School in 1973, a school that would eventually put him in its Hall of Fame, and arrived at the University of Miami without anything resembling a plan. Math held no appeal, history held no appeal, and he walked out of his SATs having already decided that academics weren't designed for someone built the way he was. Construction work felt like the more honest future. That changed when he ended up standing in the wrong registration line, or maybe the right one. A friend was queuing for the drama department, and he followed her in, almost as a joke, signing up for theater classes he figured would be easy enough to coast through without much effort. Something held him, though, and it wasn't instant or dramatic. His first year involved musicals, nothing close to the volatile, sharp-edged characters that would define his name in film. But the direction was there, and by 1978 he left Miami with a Bachelor of Fine Arts, and, for the first time, a path that didn't feel arbitrary. New York came next, and with it the bartending shifts at the Schubert organization that covered his rent while he chased auditions. Within 6 months he had landed an agent, which moved faster than the city usually allows. Then came Another World, the soap opera where he played Joey Perini from 1978 to 1981. Joey was nothing like what audiences would later expect from Ray Liotta on screen. He was warm, dependable, the television character who proposed on a hill and gave his girlfriend a St. Christopher medal in the hospital, and then watched her die, only to slip on that same hill and end up hospitalized himself, where he fell for his nurse, who happened to be the richest woman in America, and the whole thing ended in an annulment because she had never once mentioned her fortune. 3 years of that kind of dramatic storytelling sharpened him in ways no classroom could have managed. Los Angeles called in 1981, and he answered, though the city offered nothing like a warm reception. Small parts came in a short-lived television adaptation of Casablanca, and a brief appearance on St. Elsewhere, none of it moving the needle in any meaningful direction. Acting classes with coach Harry Mastro placed him in a room with Kevin Costner, Stephen Bauer, and Bauer's wife at the time, Melanie Griffith. None of them famous yet, all of them grinding toward the same distant outcome. By 1986, Griffith had landed the lead in Something Wild, directed by Jonathan Demme, and Liotta sat at 30 years old without a real film credit and a growing fear that his window was already closing. His agent couldn't get him into the audition room. His parents, both connected to politics, advised him simply to start making calls. He swallowed whatever pride was necessary and reached out to Griffith directly, who contacted Demme and told him he needed to meet Ray. That single phone call opened the door. He burned off the audition nerves with push-ups beforehand, stepped into the room, and brought something raw and unpredictable enough that Demme had no way to overlook it. By Thursday of that week, after several days of mounting doubt, the role was his. Something Wild changed the industry's perception of him immediately. Critics couldn't look away from the live wire energy he put on screen, and the performance earned him a Golden Globe nomination. Scripts arrived after that, and nearly all of them were casting him as some version of dangerous or unhinged. Rather than ride that momentum, he paused. He waited a full year before committing to another project, deliberately choosing softer material with Dominic and Eugene, and then the baseball film Field of Dreams, where he played the ghost of shoeless Joe Jackson opposite Kevin Costner, in a performance that felt almost mythical compared to the intensity he'd shown in his breakout role. Years later, he admitted that stepping away from darker parts may have cost him momentum he never fully recovered. But at the time, longevity was the priority, not velocity. Then came 1990, and the role that would outlast everything else in his career. Scorsese had been watching since Something Wild, and when the two men finally met, there was no formal audition, just a conversation. The real casting battle played out at the studio level. Warner Brothers wanted bigger names to anchor the film. Tom Cruise entered the conversation for Henry Hill, and Madonna was reportedly considered for Karen. Scorsese had a different picture entirely. Liotta fought for the part with the directness he was already known for, walking up to producer Irwin Winkler outside a Los Angeles restaurant and making his case plainly enough that Winkler called Scorsese the following morning and admitted he finally understood what the director had seen all along. Once Robert De Niro committed and Joe Pesci came with him, whatever hesitation remained at the studio dissolved. Production on Goodfellas was already moving when Liotta received word that his mother was dying. Scorsese walked to his trailer and found him broken, talking about how she had adopted him, raised him, and how kind she had always been. Scorsese told him to leave the set, told him nothing about the film mattered more than that, and Liotta surprised him by insisting on staying through the rest of the day's work. The scene scheduled for that afternoon was the celebratory rush after the crew's first major score, loud and electric with criminal euphoria. Before cameras rolled, Scorsese gathered the full cast and crew and told them what Ray was carrying that day. What appeared on film looked like pure joy, but it held something underneath it that no screenplay could have written. Goodfellas earned 6 Academy Award nominations, with Pesci taking the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor, and Henry Hill became one of the most studied performances in American crime cinema. None of that stopped the what-ifs from piling up. Tim Burton, coming off Beetlejuice, had seen enough in Something Wild to want Liotta for Batman, but the superhero genre didn't register as serious territory to him at the time, so he passed, and the role went to Michael Keaton opposite Jack Nicholson's Joker, a film that reshaped the entire blockbuster landscape. The Sopranos story played out differently than the rumors suggested. He was never offered Tony Soprano, what creator David Chase put on the table, during a meeting he traveled specifically to have while Liotta was filming Hannibal in Virginia, was the role of Ralph Cifaretto, a chaotic and volatile presence that eventually went to Joe Pantoliano and became one of the most despised characters the series ever produced. Liotta passed because another organized crime role felt like it would only deepen a brand already stamped hard by Goodfellas. The Departed fell away due to scheduling, rather than any deliberate refusal, and Scorsese's circle of returning collaborators simply never expanded to include him again. He made peace with most of it, and there was no bitterness in the way he talked about any of it, just a clear-eyed acknowledgement that no matter how many decent, upright, or gentle characters he had played across his career, from the soap opera hero to the mystical baseball player to the romantic lead in Heartbreakers, audiences always found their way back to Henry Hill. Kids who weren't alive when Goodfellas played in theaters were walking up to him and calling him the Goodfellas guy, and he talked about that with something closer to amazement than fatigue. The Many Saints of Newark eventually gave him a way back into that organized crime world on different terms, playing a brand new character with no blueprint to follow and no existing performance to imitate, just the instinct built from decades of work inside the acting craft. In May of 2022, Ray Liotta died in his sleep in the Dominican Republic at 67 years old, while on location filming a thriller called Dangerous Waters. He was working until the very end, which was the only way he had ever operated. Scorsese spoke about him afterward with unmistakable weight, describing the courage it took to carry Goodfellas from its opening frames all the way through to its final ones. A long and demanding shoot that required Liotta to hold together charm, danger, vulnerability, and barely contained chaos across nearly every scene without ever losing his grip. What Scorsese kept returning to was the fearlessness. And that is not a small thing, coming from a director who has spent his entire career searching for exactly that quality in the actors willing to step in front of his camera.